Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, in the West, we're asked a lot of questions as Muslims. We're asked many questions regularly, pressing, important questions. And these questions usually have something to do with what are referred to as post-enlightenment ideas and its connection with Islam. So let me give you an example. Someone will ask, why is it that in Islam, for example, Muslims get offended when a picture is drawn of the Prophet Muhammad? Isn't this freedom of expression and freedom of speech? And why are Muslims in this regard against freedom of expression and freedom of speech? Isn't Islam, therefore, the argument goes, a backwards religion that needs to be reformed? Do we not need to have a reform within Islam? Because actually, you'll find that Islam has aspects of it which are against enlightenment values, against liberalism, against freedom of expression, against freedom of speech. Now the thing is, these are very important questions to be asked. But what Muslims need to do, and what Westerners also need to do, is they need to question the question. Now here's the point. Every question has a presupposition. What is a presupposition? It is an assumption. It is an assumption. Obviously, with these questions, some Muslims, they go immediately on the back foot. Immediately they're on the back foot. And just like the Western colonial powers came into our grandfathers' nations and attempted to force them to believe in what they believe in militarily, now the post-colonial Western masters are doing so using different techniques. And there are different responses from Muslims and others. Some will literally bow at the knee. They will literally bow at the knee. Surrender. Give up. Yes, you're right, sir. There is a problem. We need to fix it. We need to have revivalism in Islam. We need to have reform. We need to clean it up. You're right. Some will say, we must reject this completely. This is a poisonous ideology, and we must remove it. And what we're going to be doing, inshallah, in the next 3 days, is we'll be arguing that the question itself is problematic, or the questions that are asked are problematic questions. So the first day I'm going to be dealing with liberalism. I know it's on the third day on your pamphlet, but I'm going to do it first, inshallah. I'm going to be dealing with questions which deal with liberal presuppositions. The second day, we're going to be dealing with democracy, which is very important. And the third day, we're going to be dealing with feminism. And that's why I did it on the third day, because if anything happens, I can just go. I'm going back to London. Anyways, today, inshallah, I'll be talking about liberalism. And by the way, I've written an article on this, and I'm planning to write an article on all 3 lectures. So I've written an article on liberalism. It will be published it should be online on Monday on salam.org.uk. Salam, and inshallah, we'll put the description somewhere. So if you want to do further reading, you can do that there. And moreover, there'll be an article written on each of the topics that I'll be covering today as well. Now, let's get straight into it. Today, I'm just going to go into 3 different things. I'm going to do 3 things today, inshallah. The first thing is I'm going to give you a brief history of liberalism. A brief history, so you understand what it is. Number 2, we're going to be talking about the premises of liberalism. The first principles of liberalism. Where do we start with liberalism? And number 3, we'll be talking about the implications of this on Islam and Muslims, and the discourse between Islam and Muslims in the Western context especially. So we'll start. You see, all of these slogans that you're very well aware of, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, they're extensions of the liberal philosophical framework. Okay? So if someone is asking you a question that presupposes liberalism, like these questions, the question would be this: what if your ideology is baseless? Wait a minute. Say that one more time. Okay. What if your ideology is baseless? What if there is no way to prove the very beginnings or the very starting points, the very premises of liberalism? Therefore, the question becomes obsolete. Why do Muslims get upset with the drawing of the Prophet Muhammad? Why not? Could be the easy answer. Well, it needs to be in line with liberalism. Well, if we can demonstrate that liberalism is in fact based on what you call corrigible presuppositions, meaning they are capable of reform or improvement, then there is no need to ask the question. Because you're asking me a question based on baseless foundations. So let's start with the brief history of liberalism. You see, there was a man called John Locke. Very famous man. He's actually one of the most influential people who ever lived, in my opinion. He died in 1704. He wrote many books. One of the most famous, or if not the most famous one he wrote, is a book called The Two Treatises of Government. And in this book, he argued the case for a social contract. He said, we are all born equal. We are all born free. Interesting, John Locke believed in God. In fact, he believed in one God. He was a Unitarian. He was a non-conformist Christian. He didn't believe in the Trinity. But he based much of his philosophy on God. And that's why a lot of the governments of his day, Britain, France, and of course the United States of America, they incorporated literally what he said in the Two Treatises of Government into for example, the US Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights in the United Kingdom, which was written in 1688. His words, which is one of the most important documents in all of British history, it's called the Bill of Rights. And of course, the US Declaration of Independence, one of the most important documents in all of American government and politics. So, for example, the famous phrase that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they have unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the US Declaration of Independence. It's taken from, or slightly adjusted, it's taken from John Locke. So a lot of these ideas, human beings being born free, freedom, etc., is taken directly from John Locke. Now, the thing is about John Locke is that he believed in God. And if you look at the wording of what he said in the Two Treatises of Government, he justified that, for example, human beings are born equal and that they are born free because he said that they were endowed by the Creator, and this is part of the US Declaration of Independence. They were given this by God. They were given freedom and equality by God. He had 2 or 3 principles that he believed in. One was a theological belief. So he believed that all human beings were endowed equality by God. They were given equality and freedoms by God. But he also believed in something called the hedonistic principle. And this will be a very important point, which I want you to really pay attention to. The hedonistic principle is the idea that the ultimate morality is pain and pleasure. So what's ultimately good is what feels good or what is pleasurable or desirable to you. This would be the cornerstone of liberal moral philosophy. It's called the hedonistic principle. So after John Locke came about, and he had such an influence because of the English Civil War, which took place in 1642 to 1651, where the royalists and the parliamentarians were attacking each other, Parliament reconstituted itself using a lot of the Lockean principles, so in England, and so did the US and France and these countries. They took these liberal principles and then they became very normative. It became the norm now. Anyone who speaks against the liberal principles is speaking in aberration to the social and cultural norms of the West. That must be understood. After John Locke, you had many different philosophers that came and advanced this theory, like Montesquieu or Rousseau, or, for example, Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, which we'll cover tomorrow, and others. And these individuals just expanded the theory. Most notably, I would argue, is John Stuart Mill, who came in the Victorian era, and he talked about the harm principle. So about 100, 200 years later, this man came, John Stuart Mill, and he advanced. He said, yes, he left the whole theological discussion. He didn't say that we were born equal or free. He believed that we were born equal, but he didn't say it's from God. Some say he was agnostic even. Maybe he didn't believe in God, Allahu A'lam. God knows best if he believed in God or not, yeah? But here's a problem. This is a very big problem for liberals. If initially, first question, if initially the justification for human beings being born equal and free was based on theology, i.e. God, how could a succession of philosophers inherit the same belief system without basing it upon the same principle? In other words, John Stuart Mill, yes, he said, we believe that we are born equal, that we're born free, but he didn't say anything about God. So the question would be, how can you prove that we were born equal or that we were born free? This is a very important question. And what do you mean when you say we were born equal or we were born free? Even John Locke himself said, this is not in all cases, the creator might decide that we are not born equal, for example. So what do we mean? Well, we are not born equal. What do we mean we're born equal? We are not born equal if we look at it on the face of it. Because really, some of us are born in impoverished places. Some of us are born in very, bad places, rich places, poor places. Some of us are born with disabilities. Some of us are born as men, women, black, white, this, that. Where is the equality? It's differences. All I see is inequalities everywhere. So what do we mean by equality? So someone will come and say, actually, we mean equality of opportunity. And some others will say, no, equality of outcome. But they've had to adjust that because they realized the fallacious nature of just saying that we were born equal. What does it mean? What do we actually mean? What do we mean by we were born free? Almost all philosophers agree that everything is determined. Even atheist philosophers believe this. That is determined by genetics and environment. So what is freedom? What do you mean? Explain. So already, it sounds nice, what they say, but it has no real evidence base. John Stuart Mill did try and prove something called utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the idea, it's really the hedonistic principle. So pleasure for you, but pleasure for the largest amount of people. The greatest good for the greatest number. So it's going back to what's pleasurable for you. And this became really the most normative way of describing liberalism. The most normative way of describing liberalism is through the hedonistic principle or the extension of that which is utilitarianism. And then he put into it the harm principle. So he says that you can do whatever you want